that my accent makes it a little bit challenging to picture me in a Canadian context, but
No, I was. So we actually have another guest on today called Jonathan, coming straight from Canada, and going to tell us a little bit about the company he set up with his wife, I believe. You set them
that's
up
right,
together.
Cindy,
So,
yes.
I'll hand over to you if you can kind of explain a little bit about yourself, the company, and then we'll go into some questions from there.
Absolutely. My wife and I, well, my wife's Canadian. I'm actually Canadian now as well, as being an Aussie, and she's also Australian as well. So we've both got split personalities, which is great, works really well. We moved here in 2001 from Australia after living there for 12 years after getting married. We just celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary last week. So it's been a good road so far. And I got involved in the wine industry a little bit in Australia. And so when I moved here, I really didn't have any particular career that I was thinking of. And so I started selling Aussie wine from the Hunter Valley for a very, very small company. And then after a couple of years, we ended up taking over that company and developing a pretty decent import company in Canada, Western Canada. And it was really through our success in wine that I was approached by the brand ambassador at that stage for 80 Rattray, James Cowan, to represent them in this marketplace. And up until that point, I'd only represented one spirit, and that was Tasmanian Distillery, Sullivan's Cove, because of connections that I had in the wine industry in Australia. So that was my birth, if you will, into the world of whiskey, was through the lens of single cask strength whiskies from all over Scotland by 80 Rattray. So it was absolutely brilliant, and of course completely spoiled me for the rest of my whiskey experience. You know, a lot of people will maybe ease their way into it with recognizable brand names or whiskies that are very crowd pleasing and, you know, 40%, and we're making, you know, 150,000 bottles of this. I started at the completely opposite end, you know, 150 bottles of this, 300 bottles of that. It was quite eye-opening how complex the world of whiskey was. I was very, very much into wine for sure. I mean, you can even see the picture here behind me that my wife got me for my 40th, I think, a long time ago. But I grabbed a hold of whiskey like a duck to water. In fact, I went to Scotland and bought a kilt before the whiskey had even touched down in Canada. And then, of course, I asked the wrong person where to go and buy a kilt, because for any of you that are familiar with Morrison by Moore, I'm sure you all are, Tim Morrison, the Morrison family sold those three distilleries, Auchentoshan, Glengarry and Bowmore, to Suntory in the 80s. And his share of it was quite considerable. So when you ask a gentleman of that stature where to go and buy a kilt, he tells you to go to Kinloch and Anderson, which I did, which was a fabulous experience. But, you know, $3,500 later, I've got a kilt.
Yeah.
Now, it's been fun wearing that. My wife actually complained bitterly about it, because she said that it's not fair that I have the most expensive outfit in the house. A lot more money than we spent on her wedding dress. Anyway, I digress. Just kind of giving you a little bit of background. We are a tiny company. It's just my wife and I. We ended up moving away from the import business on the wine side completely. We started Secret Spirits in 2014. And our first product was Scotch Whisky Advent Calendar. And that really came about through attending a whiskey festival in Vancouver. I was at a supermarket, high-end supermarket called Save On Foods in Vancouver. And they had this incredible Advent calendar that was filled with dark chocolate, which my wife really loves. And it was really high-end. I'd never seen something so specky in an Advent calendar. And I just happened to be standing there looking at it, thinking, you know, this would be a great way to showcase an adventure in Scotch whisky for people in a fun way. I'm sure all of you understand the challenges in educating people about single cask whiskies, and I'm sure Ed would agree with me on this one. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and people still have the same questions today as they had 20 years ago. there's no doubt that we are playing in the very, very shallow end of the pool in terms of the whiskey industry. You know, when you think about how much single malt whiskey is sold in the world compared to blended, and then you think about how many single casks are bottled in comparison to big brand single malt, and then you talk about situations like this where we've got passionate people that love to buy that, you know, 1 of 200 bottles of a single cask. It's a very small percentage. So it doesn't matter where you go, how many people you talk to, there's always going to be questions. And so I wanted to be able to bring an adventure and an experience to people that would bypass maybe some of the barriers that they have in thinking about independent bottling, single cask. You know, their questions about, well, how can you have, you know, Glen Talkers on your bottle when you're not representing the Glen Talkers distillery? Those types of questions that come up all the time. And the funnest way that we could think of doing that was to create an advent calendar. So we actually made the first completely independently bottled version of a Scotch whiskey advent calendar. And it wasn't just a slap hazard 25 whiskeys. Yeah, we do a Christmas Day whiskey just because, but we don't just kind of slap it together. We really try and create a journey through all the different regions and styles of Scotch whiskey. So we're going to include a single grain. We're going to, where we can, include a blended Scotch. We're always going to have a number of blended malts, but the focus is certainly going to be on single cask, single malt. Funnily enough, over the 6 calendars that we've done so far, really the hardest piece to find is an independently bottled blended Scotch. Because, you know, it's generally speaking a lower end of the market and price point, and it's something that you have to make a fair amount of to warrant the expense of it. And so it's generally an area that smaller independent bottlers don't play in.
Yeah.
So that has been the challenge. So we have had a couple of calendars that didn't represent the biggest category of Scotch whiskey, but it's really been a fun ride. And my wife and I have been very, very passionate about it. If we had known all of the challenges that we would have had to have gone through when we started with our first calendar in 2014, we might have chosen a different path, because herding kittens is easy in comparison to putting together 25 different whiskies every year. We also do a different tasting glass every year. We have a tasting booklet. You know, we try and make the whole experience really fun and interesting. You know, we do a daily blog. We engage other influencers. So we've had lots of different YouTubers and bloggers over the years, so people can follow along. We actually don't give tasting notes in the product itself. So the tasting booklet is a blank sheet for you to write your own.
Yeah.
Of course, in the blogs that I'm writing, I am going to give my own opinion on what that tastes like. But right from the very first edition, we deliberately made sure that we had other writers and bloggers following along as well, and we were linking that so that people could see that, you know, we've got 3 different people here all doing the same journey, if you will, but everybody's got their own idea on what these whiskies taste like, and it creates a lot of engagement, and it's really fun. As Ed said before, we all have different palates, and we're all our makeup is really the sum of our life experiences, where we've grown up, how challenged we were as kids with different flavors, you know, how adventurous our parents were when they were feeding us, and then what decisions we've made. I've certainly found, living in North America and Canada, the flavor profile that most people have is quite narrow. You know, a lot of foods here are very heavily sugar laden. People tend to get stuck into, you know, a fairly narrow rut of what they like and eat. And that certainly affects people's perception in terms of their palate. That changes when you start going down the slippery slope of drinking whiskey, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's so diverse and so incredibly complex. So I've definitely found that people that are on that whiskey journey, doesn't take long. Because it's like going to the gym, right? You're working out and your muscles get more refined, better. Same thing with whiskey. The more you drink, the more you try. So my adage has always been, you know, stop and smell the flowers, get life's experiences, because it's going to serve you well. So that mentality that I've always had, I'm one of those lucky people. I love a really wide range of flavors, everything from the soft and delicate to, you know, the big and punchy. And so we try and also cater for that in our adventure, that we're touching on all those different characteristics, as many as we can anyway. It's just such a big wide world. I kind of feel sorry for those people who, well, not really sorry, because, you know, if that's your experience and maybe you're just drinking Glenfiddich and that's what you love, and that's your experience of Scotch whiskey, that's fine. There's no problems with that. But whiskey is so much more than just one flavor profile. And I think Ed is absolutely in my wheelhouse on this. That's why he's doing what he's doing, is you've got so many different flavors from all of these different casks and different distilleries. You think about Scotland, it's such a tiny country, and yet this distillery down the road from this distillery is producing such amazingly diverse and different whiskey. Yeah. Even within the same walls of the same distillery, you've got so many different expressions. You know, distilleries like Tobermory that almost go out of their way to have different brands with different expressions that they pump out of the same distillery. So, you know, I'm certainly very, very passionate about whiskey. I really love it. There's no way in the world that Cindy and I would have gone through everything we've gone through in the last 6 years if we didn't love whiskey. Because it certainly hasn't been a, you know, it's not an easy piece to put together. If it was just shifting casks or just bottling single casks, you know, like Ed does, that's super easy. You know, that would be awesome if that's all we did. But we did actually come to a point where we thought we probably should do that. But this year we're kind of focusing on our back editions, you know, with COVID-19 and all the delays and everything. There's just doesn't look like there's any way that we're going to be able to get production done this year. So we have a lot of backstock from, I think, our 2nd edition right through to 6th edition. We still have different calendars available. So that's going to be our fun experience this year that we're promoting in UK and Europe, and also in the Canadian market, is pick your favorite. And if you've never had one of our adventures, then you can either do the bright-eyed bushy-tailed Christmas morning thing and just pick one randomly, because they all are completely different. Or if you're one of the kids who used to sneak down under the tree and unwrap your present, have a look at it, and then rewrap it up like my wife did, then you can have a look at our spoiler page on our website and see what's in there. So yeah, it's really fun, and it's enabled us to really utilize our connections that we've made in Scotland. We've had the privilege and pleasure of being able to travel to Scotland a couple of times a year, firstly to pick the whiskies, and then quite often to actually help with production. That was the fun part. We were using a very small bottling plant for a number of years, so I was able to roll my sleeves and get on the bottling line and actually take part in every aspect of putting it together, which was really super fun. So we've really delved into the industry and really enjoyed just being able to find delicious things and have people come along on the adventure with us. It's really cool. So if you guys want to see one, I've got one here that I can show you.
See, this is what I was going to say. I mean, I'm glad you've kind of got one there, because all the pictures I've seen, it's an extremely well put together package. It's not a cardboard box. It looks quite hefty. Is it wooden or?
Yep. So it's made with MDF. So it's really solid. You know, it's almost kind of a little bit more like a piece of furniture than just a, you know, it's meant to be something that is really nice that you want to, you know, maybe put up on the mantle or whatever as you're going through, you know, leading up to the Christmas period, or any time for that matter. Obviously, whiskey doesn't have to be just a Christmas thing. So then you whack it open, and then you've got your 25 days of whiskey adventures. You've got a couple of different bits and pieces. We've got the tasting booklet in here, I think. Hopefully this one has one still. No, somebody's pinched it. I'll grab one from the other one. But what I'll actually do is I'll pull this out and show you the bottles behind.
Well, I was going to say, I've got a couple of bottles here, aren't you? Yeah.
So there's your 25 50 ml bottles. We decided on 50 ml. It certainly made our product a bit more premium because obviously it's a lot more whiskey. But when you do almost a 2-ounce bottle, you can share it with somebody if you want, and you can both have a decent dram. You can do things like drink half of it now and then go back to it, or if you want to compare it against some of the other whiskies in the adventure, or if you just want to have a really full dram in a glass and enjoy the whiskey for a good amount of time. It just seemed for us that anything less than that was just not going to be able to give you the flexibility to do what you want with it. But yeah, like I said, it does make the product a little bit more premium because it's a lot more whiskey. And then every year we do a different tasting glass. So those who have been kind of following along with our adventures have been building up a little library of glassware. Because as I'm sure most of you know, different whiskey glasses give you different experiences when you're drinking. So the last one this was from our 6th edition. Yep, good old Glencairn glass. It took us 6 years to finally put the Glencairn in there, and not because it's not, a decent whiskey glass, but, Glencairn is kind of the village bicycle of whiskey glasses. Everybody's had a ride, and most people have one at home, right? So
a few.
So for us, we wanted to give people a range of really different whiskey glasses that had unique characteristics, everything from more versatility as a tumbler style glass, or something really delicate like the Samaroli custom whiskey glass that really allows for delicate flavors and characters to really be prominent. Glencairn, I find, is, it's just a great stock standard glass, but the narrow nose can be a little bit much for some cask strength whiskies because it really focuses everything. So it's not my go-to glass for some expressions that I'm trying to taste. So we've just tried to create as much of a broad range of whiskey experience for people as possible. And then when it comes to the actual whiskies themselves, I have a map of Scotland, a distillery map of Scotland in my office, and I've got little highlighted dots on all the distilleries. And so as the years have gone through, whenever I've been able to see a cask of whiskey from a different distillery that we haven't bottled yet from a broker, I'm like, oh, awesome. So we're trying to, really have that broad experience of so many different distilleries and styles as we can. It's really fun to be able to create the adventures and then come along with people. Last year was probably the most fun because we actually raised money for our production through Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding platform. And we deliberately set out to take all of those people on the entire journey. So my wife and I, when we went to Scotland last year, we videoed everything that we did. Going to warehouses, rummaging around barrels, tasting whiskies. It was the first time we'd really done that. And people loved it. It was great to be able to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and see what goes on when you're trying to pick some of these casks, which is really, really fun. So our goal is just to get delicious whiskey to people and have as much fun as possible along the way. And I think that, to that end, we've definitely achieved that. So along this journey, we realized that we should probably be bottling some of these casks ourselves. We've always been 100% independently bottled whiskies in our calendars, and we've highlighted a lot of great independent bottlers over the years. We started out with 3, Weems, 80 Rattray and Samaroli, and we extended that. I think our 5th edition we had 10 different independent bottlers represented there, and our 5th edition was actually the first time that we did a serious tilt at bottling some secret spirits whiskies, which I have here in my hand. So because we are super, super small, and I think to this point we've only bottled 9 casks in total under the Secret Spirits label. We didn't quite have the luxury of going bespoke on any sort of bottles. So we did the good old, I think we wanted to connect our bottling with what we do for our Scotch Whisky Advent Calendar. So we use the mini version of this, which is the tall round bottle, in the calendar. So we thought, well, it's just a natural fit that we should do the tall round for our full size versions. And then my wife set about designing this beautiful packaging just to, she does all the design work. I just pick and sell the whiskies. So, she's picked these lovely pictures of Scotland, and she found this really cool box. We also don't put the tasting notes on the box. You can go and read about it on the blog if you like, but we do give you all the information on the label. So, you know, cask type, number, region, how many bottles. This is actually a single cask of Glentorkas, 63.5%, only 149 bottles. And the reason for that is, of course, the rest of the cask was used for our 5th edition Scotch Whisky Open Calendar. The 5th edition happened to be the year of big whiskies. You know, that's the other fun thing. Every year that we went over there, every calendar would have a different theme because it all depends on what's available, right, from all these brokers. 6th edition was a heavily sherried edition. It was just like people were throwing sherry whiskeys at me. I couldn't even, it was like, okay, enough sherry whiskeys. But it turned out to be an amazing experience, whereas other years, sherry has been harder to come by. This particular year was just, everything was huge. We bottled a Glenallachie that was 67 and change, which is just enormous. And one of the highest strength whiskies that I've ever had from Scotland. And phenomenal. Big basket of fruit stout whiskey, just amazing. So yeah, it's really fun that every year kind of takes on its own unique characteristics as you're trying to journey around the country. You know, some regions obviously are more represented than others. Speyside, for example, because there's so many distilleries there. Campbellton would be one that we have had whiskies from, but you know, it's only a couple of distilleries, so it's hard to be getting a barrel every year from that region. But you know, we're always getting the main regions in: Lowlands, Highlands, Speyside, Isla, Island. Those are always covered every year, which is awesome. So yeah, it's really, really fun to be able to select so many different unique whiskies and taste them every year. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll jump in on there, because obviously, as we kind of explained to you when we first spoke to you, that the name isn't a big name over here in England and Europe. So
I don't think it's a big name anywhere.
No, but you know, I mean, I've kind of gone out and looked, and you grabbed my attention instantly when last year's first dram was a 17-year-old Auchentoshan. So, but you know, I mean, my first impressions when I saw the pictures in the box, you know, it was like, wow, you know, you've not just put a calendar out there, you've put, like you said, almost a piece of furniture, something that you can put on the shelf and it be sat there all year round and it doesn't look out of place. And I was really impressed. And for those who haven't kind of seen, you know, I don't know if you can see that. So that's the sort of bottle. Now, the one confusing thing that I sort of still not really understand is, so you're bottling single cask, but yet each of these bottles have got the independent bottlers' names on them. So are you buying the spirit in bottles, or is it just that you've bought it from that independent bottler as a cask, so you've still named them?
All of the above. So yeah, all of the above. So basically what we wanted to do was to work with other independent bottlers, because you know that's my MO, that's my history in the whiskey industry, is working with independent bottlers. So it really comes down to however we can get that expression from them. We prefer to take it in bulk because we don't want to spend the money on the additional packaging, of course. Yeah. But for certain bottlers, their plans for bottling precede ours. And so, for example, in the case of Weems malts, there was nothing that could be done for us to get bulk whiskey from them. It was always going to be in bottle, which, you know, was a shame because it just, you know, that's a whole lot of wastage. But we did find our bottling plant was very, very good at getting rid of clingage, making sure they wrung every little bit out of those bottles. So, you know, we are still bottling their single cask expression, you know, whether it was the, you know, aromatic orange tobacco Glenrothes or whatever it was that came from Weems, but we had to decant them out of bottles, which is really a shame. For the most part, though, we try and go bulk as much as possible. And as you could imagine, with the limited number of calendars that we're making, we don't require an entire barrel. You know, even when you're doing 2,000 calendars, 50 ml bottle in each one, that's still not a whole cask.
Yeah.
So, when we bought these 7 casks for our 5th edition, and the remnant of those barrels went into the full bottles, those were the first full barrels that we had purchased. So literally we're just telling the independent bottlers, we need 150 litres, 100 litres, whatever it is that we're going to be needing to make up those calendars.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, everything is bottled by us. But the reason why we have the independent bottlers logo on our little label is we want people to know that this came from Samaroli or 80 Rattray or Weems or single cask maybe in the future.
So on that then, I mean, I know you mentioned sort of ABV. I mean, I'm sat here with, if I can find it, a Glenmurray, and that's bottled at 64.8. So everything you're doing, like you say, is all independent bottlers. It's all single cask. It's all cask strength. Obviously, naturally.
Okay, but it's not necessarily cask strength.
Right.
It is from us because that's what Secret Spirits do. We just do single cask strength. But every independent bottler, as you know, has their own take on what they want to bottle at. Weems, for example, is predominantly 46%. Samaroli is quite often below 46, but they don't chill filter.
Yeah.
Single cask is obviously cask strength. But every independent bottler's got their own take. So we are representing kind of what they do because, everybody's got their own unique way of looking at it. And so we bottle it exactly what they bottle at it or what they would normally bottle it at.
And so each year when you're looking at it, do you set a figure of how many calendars you want to make, or do you kind of go along with almost, what is pre-ordered, or how does it work for you?
So again, we've got an all of the above answer to that one. We have in the past set out and made X number of calendars, and then we've tried to find the markets to sell those. Last year, because we had the Indiegogo crowdfunding deal, we made less calendars because it was more about who was going to be ordering on that platform, and then we buffered out just a little bit extra to catch other customers that still hadn't found out that was how we were doing it last year. So, unlike some other calendars where, they're utilizing a lot of off-the-shelf whiskies, you can continue to make those calendars because there's always stock of that whiskey. You can just keep going. Yeah. We get one shot and one shot only to make our different editions, and it'll never be made again, right? So we've got to pick that number, and it really comes down to how much cash flow we have.
Yeah.
Because it's an expensive proposition for us because it takes so much time to complete and so much time for us to sell them. There's a huge lead time between buying all the whiskey and then eventually getting it into people's hands. So we've got to be kind of careful on that front.
I mean, I think one thing that's very noticeable on the calendar front, I mean, I've reviewed for, I think the last 3 years, I've reviewed calendars on my blog, and one of the sort of comments you generally get is they're expensive. But when you break them down and you look at what you're getting and you look at how much you're getting and all those different options, they're actually fairly cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, if you were to go out and buy these 25 bottles to try all these different whiskeys, it would cost you a small fortune, especially because every edition, Christmas Day is always over 30 years old. We always have a bunch of whiskies in there that are over 20. My wife complains a lot about me breaking the whiskey budget every year, but when you see all these delicious drams, you just can't help yourself, right?
No, exactly. And that's it.
So I was only going to say with lockdown and all the virtual tastings that have been happening, everyone's become probably rather desensitized to buying lots of small samples, whereas last Christmas we might not have been. So you might see that this Christmas could be a boom for Advents. Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone's thinking, well, you can get what you want out of a sample. Most of them have been 30 ml. If you're doing 50, that's great. And what you said about you share it with a friend if you're feeling generous. But what I always do is I have a little bit. I might have 15 or 20 ml during a tasting, and then come back to it later so I can write notes on it in my own time or enjoy it at a date. So this year, if you're doing 50 ml samples, people have been probably looking for those during tastings, the tasting season that we're in now. So hopefully we'll see a boom for you. I wish you luck with it.
Well, that's it.
That would be nice.
I think if lockdown, I mean, we're all starting to look now at maybe a second wave. So if lockdown comes and we're still locked, I can see Christmas calendars being absolutely blown out the sky this year. You know, just everybody going for them because there's nothing else to do. But I suppose the other side is you could also say a lot of people have been furloughed and things like that. So will that affect what they're spending on whiskey? Who knows?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. But you know, I think we'll be fine because we're just concentrating now on moving all of our different editions. There's just no way in the world that we can do a 7th edition this year.
No,
that will have to be slated for 2021. But the other piece is we are now focused on your market, UK and Europe. We'll still service our own market here in Canada. But you know, unfortunately for those that live in the US, we're no longer catering to that market. It's just too difficult logistically to handle. Unfortunately, it's nice to work in a market like the UK and Europe that's far more forward thinking about how you can purchase alcohol online and have it shipped to you directly. And I think actually this whole pandemic situation with people staying at home and buying more online, of course, you know, everybody's had the Amazon experience and purchased things online, but the alcohol industry has really lagged behind other industries, and it's just because of the control situation. It's a controlled substance. But there's more and more barriers coming down now. It's more and more available to be able to order spirits online. And I think a lot more people are thinking about ordering spirits online than they have in the past. So from that perspective, we're very excited because what we found with our brand is it suffers in bricks and mortar retail. Sits on a shelf, or the retailer complains that it's too big and it takes up too many shelf spots. They're not explaining to the customer what's involved, what it is, the passion with which it was built, all of those things. Whereas now, you know, we're engaging people online, creating a community. You get to talk to us, you know who we are. We're just a husband and wife team who love whiskey. It's a different proposition when you look at our brand from that lens than if you just see it on a dusty shelf in a store.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we've transitioned away from the bricks and mortar piece, even though that was our early success. And I think we've done it at the right time, which means that we'll be able to continue on.
I mean, one question going back to the actual calendar itself, does all the internals actually pull out? And if they do your bottles fit inside the box then? So it could become a whiskey cabinet in its own merit.
The bottle's too big. You can have it lying down if you wanted to.
Right. I just wondered because you know, obviously, like you're saying there that it takes up a lot of shelf space. Then you kind of think it would be nice that if once you've done the Christmas tasting, that you could take it out and stand the bottle up, you know, 2 or 3 of your bottles inside it, and have it as like a cabinet.
Yeah, I know it's really a shame because it's so solid, and you know, people are like, oh, what am I going to do with the box after? And some people have come up with some really great ideas on different things to do, and then other times it just gets recycled, right? But yeah,
if you go in collaboration with the single cask, then their bottles might fit inside it.
Well, actually, I think their bottles would because they're a lot shorter than the tall rounds, right? So you know that might be a good size head.
Fiona had a question about whether there would be any single cask samples in the Advent calendars. I think Fiona was interested to know.
Well, I think going forward, it's actually inevitable at this point.
Is the correct answer.
That was one of Ed's challenging questions, I'm sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think the most appropriate correct answer is yes. There'll be the single cask bottling of the English whiskey in there.
that is like the perfect answer, isn't it?
And even better answer would be, and there will be a Whiskey Circus edition of it.
Whiskey Circus edition. Nice.
Well, I mean,
Nice.
you know, you never know. Come Christmas, if we are still sort of doing this, then, you know, maybe we could look at getting a couple of the calendars in and doing reviews of them daily. So, you know, what?
Nice.
But
Yeah, we're actually what we've done right now is we've made our calendars available online for the UK and 15 different countries in Europe. I think we've knocked 20% off them, so that people can have a quarantine whiskey experience, which would be fun. And then this has only just happened recently. We're just starting to get the word out. But what we'd like to be doing is see how many people want to get on board with that, and then we can start meeting together regularly and all drinking through similar drams or having adventures with each other and talking about the whiskies, which would be really, really fun.
Well, that's it, because I mean, quite a few of us did calendars the Christmas just gone, and you know, we all did our blogs and kind of put them out the day after, so everybody could read up on them, and it became like a little community, you know, and that's the nice thing about doing these calendars, that it does get out there. It does help sell them, you know, maybe not that year, but the year after and the year after, and there is, you know, there is a lot of merit about people talking about the calendars. It kind of sells on for the next year, and people take note of them.
Yeah, I think for us, the one piece that has been the most fun about making these is seeing how it's brought people together.
Yeah.
Over these wonderful whiskies. You know, that, and definitely it's expanded so many people's palates and views on Scotch whiskey, and especially independent bottling.
Yeah.
A lot of people get these calendars that have never ever purchased an independent bottling ever, or even know what independent bottling is. They're just buying a Scotch whiskey advent calendar. Next thing they know, their whole entire world has changed, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and one thing I'd like to add, you know, while we're sort of talking about these things, it's not just the calendars that you do. I think I saw on your website you do a rum treasure chest as well, which again looks, you know, a nice little item. You know, do you want to explain a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So the Rum's Revenge is a fictional pirate ship that we created, and then we named this brand after it. So it's a pirate chest, and then when you open that chest up, it has a wax sealed treasure map and a little handmade Rum's Revenge pirate ship in a bottle. So you can sail your ship around the map, and then you match the symbols on the map with the chest to find your next rum. And these are there's 12 rums, and they're all limited edition single cask rums from all around the world. So you're literally going on a similar journey, just not an advent calendar journey. You're going on a 12-day or 12-month rum adventure, whatever. You know, if you could handle it for 12 months, for me it'd be a 12-hour adventure.
That sounds awesome.
Sort of jumping onto again, you know, like a journey and things like that. So could we maybe see in the future your calendar being a world whiskey calendar rather than just a Scotch whiskey calendar? Or do you already, you know, is that something you've already done or looked at?
Yeah, there's no doubt that with a little bit more success, we could have the means and the scope to do something like that. And I would certainly like to do something like that. We do have another brand in the works that we have completed in terms of the branding and all of that side of the piece. It's taken us 2 years. It's called the Easy Whiskey, and it's a Prohibition era whiskey experience through the lens of North American whiskies, and that has a deck of cards that tells the Prohibition story. So the Irish gangsters are the hearts, and the bootleggers are the spades, and the Prohibition cops are the diamonds, and the Irish gangsters are the clubs. And then the king, queen, ace, and jack of each suit is a unique piece of artwork that kind of tells the Easy Whiskey story. And then you open the tin and you get a stylized map of old Chicago, and you get a 1920s cocktail bill that you read through that gives you hints and tips to find your way through the streets of Chicago and find the different speakeasies, and that's when you pop out the hole to find your little whiskey.
Yeah.
So, fun things like that. We actually had worked on a brand called the World Whiskey Traveler Suitcase, and it was basically a suitcase that had whiskeys from all around the world. And we were working on that actually for a client in the US, and it didn't end up coming to fruition. But we've still got all the branding and everything for that piece. So that would be really cool to see that come to life at some point. I actually, I have in the past, I've sold probably more whiskey from other countries than even from Scotland, even though I'm catching up now with the focus on the Scotch Whisky Advent Calendar. But we were the first importer for Amrut. And so we sold a ton of Amrut in the early days, and that was really challenging because at that time, people were just completely freaked out by the notion of an Indian whiskey.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a lot more accepted these days, but when I first started launching that, it was really, really a challenge. And of course, Tasmania Distillery, which I mentioned, single malt whiskey from Australia. We've sold American whiskies. Actually, we were the first importer in Canada for the English Whiskey Company, but that was before they had whiskey. So we were selling their not yet whiskey editions.
Yeah.
So, I love whiskey from wherever it's from. I don't have any, it just happens that we had the connections and to make a Scotch Whisky Advent Calendar, so we went for it. But yeah, I absolutely love great whiskey from all over the world. And I think that the barriers to that have really come down. People are far more excited to try whiskeys from any country. Wherever somebody's passionate, they can make great whiskey. And when you take all of those extra elements, like Ed was alluding to before, Bangalore is 3,000 feet above sea level and sits around 30 degrees Celsius all year round. So the aging profile for Amrut whiskey is so much faster than Scotch whiskey. And that can be a good and a bad thing, but it certainly means that they get rapid maturation. Even using different types of barley that they have from, the bread basket in the northern part of India, that it has a unique characteristic to it that's really interesting. So yeah, I just love all of these different places in the world that are now making whiskey, bringing another flavor element to the world of whiskey that was not there before, which is brilliant.
So what I'm going to do now is, because obviously you managed to ask Ed a few questions, and I'm sure Ed must have put some questions together if he's done his homework right. So have we got any questions, Ed?
Well, my obvious question has been asked already, and it's even better coming from kind of others rather than me. But one question I'd be interested in, the Scotch Advent calendars, how do you decide what sequence to put them in, and how do you put together the pattern of the whole?
That is an excellent question. And there is a little bit of method to the madness, for sure. You always want to start day one with something a little special, right? It's the beginning of the adventure. You want to have something that people are going to be like, wow, that's really a great way to start. You want to kick the train off on the right note. So the number one slot, we have always moved it around to a different independent bottler each year, and then try to showcase something truly unique. As Soren said, for our 6th edition, it was a 17-year-old sherry cask Auchentoshan that was particularly delicious. And it was the first time in any of our editions that we've been able to get a cask of Auchentoshan, so it was really cool. Then you want to work your way through different independent bottlers, try and rotate through them so you're not having too many independent bottlers at the same in sequence, and then traveling around through different regions as much as you can, in the context of different styles, different distilleries, different ages, different cask types. So I'm constantly trying to take people on this adventure, and we'll slot in some of the more epic whiskies. We'll thread that through the entire experience, because you always, you need to be rewarded for the last 5 days of whiskey that you've been through by having something a little more special. And then that sort of slowly but surely builds its way up to the last week leading into Christmas is nothing but wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. amazing whiskies all the way up to Christmas Day. Now, when I say amazing whiskies, obviously what's amazing for somebody is not necessarily going to be amazing for others. But, you know, I would definitely say that week leading up to Christmas is, generally speaking, a little older whiskies, maybe a little bit more unique. They certainly cost me more money. But we are also 100% on board with how Ed finds the whole age statement piece. I've got an example right here of a really cool cask that we bottled that was part of our 5th edition. It's called Ochender and Peated, and it was only because we couldn't put the distillery name on it, which is Glenglassaugh. And I bought this cask from Stuart Nickerson. We actually were the first importer for Glenglassaugh when Stuart rekindled that distillery and brought it back. And so I've had a long, fun relationship with him. He's a great guy. And this was a cask of peated Glenglassaugh that he laid down for himself in a Sauterne cask. And so he sold it to us for our 5th edition. We bottled the rest. And it's 8 years old, which, you know, we proudly have on the label and the bottle. And it's a younger whiskey, but it certainly doesn't taste young in any stretch of the imagination. Absolutely magical stuff. So, you know, we've had 5-year-old age statements, 6-year-old age statements. I think that's the other bonus of what we do and how we're threading it through. Because people have no preconceived ideas when they buy our calendar, they are going to taste really great blended malts without shying away from the shelf because it says the word blend on it. They're going to try younger whiskies without feeling all snobby about the fact that it's not, you know, in their wheelhouse of, I prefer 15-year-old whiskies. So it just kind of pulls all those walls down, and they drink the whiskey for the whiskey's sake. Which is exactly the way we want it. And it opens people's eyes and allows them to experience whiskey in an unbiased way, if you will, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I always, when I first started looking at the calendars, I kind of imagined that you would start off with, I don't want to say the poorest drams, because in theory, none of them are poor, but, you know, the sort of younger and work up to those big things. But I kind of get where you say you come in with a big bang at the beginning and then mix it up. You know, it's an interesting way of doing things.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you threw in, I mean, obviously, just to try and hit that price point, you have to mirror that 30-year-old at Christmas Day with something far less expensive. Yeah. But we're always picking great independently bottled whiskies at any age. But it would, you know, we don't want to have a situation where people are, you know, they've gone for a week and all they've been trying is, you know, inexpensive blended malts, right? Yeah. Because they're going to think, oh, is that the whole experience? Is that all I'm going to be doing? We want every day to be a new day. We want people to be like,
do you find that come towards the end of the calendar, all they're remembering is wow, 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 wow?
Sometimes. You know, but I think a lot of people look back over our calendars. A lot of people write the tasting notes in the little booklet. A lot of people follow along with other blogs. And so, you know, it's an experience as a whole. Yeah. Sure. I mean, on Christmas Day, when they've opened their bottle of 30-year-old, you want them to be like, that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And it was really nice that I'm now getting to experience. And for a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever had a whiskey that was 30 years of age. Yeah. Right? Because to buy a full bottle of a 30-year-old whiskey is extremely expensive. Oh, yeah. So you caught me on that one, Soren. Yes, I do want to leave people with some warm and fuzzies at the end of the whole thing. Yeah. Thinking that, you know, they've
I think the nice thing as well that you do is you do put that extra dram in there for Christmas Day. A lot of the calendars that you see about, you know, they go from the 1st of December to the 24th. And then your 25th, you're kind of like, I would just want one more. I mean, the ideal scenario...
Even the chocolate ones don't.
Pardon?
Yeah, I know.
Sorry to jump in. I was going to say, even the chocolate ones don't always have a 25th.
No, none of them do. Yeah,
takes the mick. Yeah. I see, Jonathan, your role when you're putting together the order, you're like a composer or a DJ, you know, or someone that's putting an album together.
Exactly.
You have to send these guys on a journey. It can't just all be one thing building to a crescendo at the end, because then you're just in a big build the whole time, and no one wants to be in that suspense. You want to have little rewards. Well, it should all be rewarding along the way, but highlights and things. You've got to pace it out and keep people interested in guessing. So, a DJ or composer, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I think going back to the actual presentation as well, and again, I may be wrong, but I think you're the only ones that actually add the glass each year as well. I don't think I've seen any others that actually give you a tasting glass as well.
And so I have seen one calendar that, you know, they have a Glencairn every year. Right. But there certainly hasn't been anybody that's been helping you build a library of different whiskey glasses like we have. Yeah. We definitely, we put a lot of thought and time and energy into this. And every little extra piece that we add makes our life that much more difficult.
Yeah. I kind of think, you know, where you went before with it, that, you know, the presentation is superb. You know, maybe add that little carrying handle on top as well, so you can carry it around with you, you know, like your suitcase type thing, because you know, it almost is. I mean, I think what it kind of reminded me was Glenfarclas have just brought out their family cask trunk, and they've put their family casks in it, and it's like a trunk, the old-fashioned style that you can walk around with, and you kind of see that in a similar presentation where you've got a nice big solid box with all these drams in, and you kind of want to walk around with it and say, look what I've got.
All right, mate. I'll add that to the shopping list then. Suitcase handle.
Suitcase handle, yeah, and a little trolley maybe to push it along with.
And a trolley. Okay, great.
So has anybody else got any questions for Jonathan while we're still recording, or are we happy to go to a free-for-all in a minute?
It's not so much a question as it is a reflection, but we've talked quite a few times across both sessions about the fact that leaving preconceptions at the door and trying whiskies for what they are is really important. Whether that's a whiskey you've been super excited and super looking forward to trying, or whether it's a whiskey that normally you might say that's not quite my cup of tea. I think what's cool about Jonathan's adventure is that you know you're getting a carefully curated set of whiskies that should each be really high quality. And you then have the opportunity to try those, to experiment, to experience very different styles and approaches. And I really like that. I think that is a great way to, yes, try whiskies that you know you're going to love, but also find new loves that you've not tried before.
Yeah, totally agree. I think Fiona has just said, well, Paul started it off with, we should have an advent calendar that lasts 365 days, but Fiona's kind of come in and said, it's actually 366 this year, so I think we'll go with Fiona's. That would be quite a good one, but I'm not sure even my bank balance would go to funding one of those.
Yeah, that would be an expensive proposition. It would be pretty huge too, trying to get 366 50ml bottles into one package, but that would be fun.
Especially with your wooden box and not just a cardboard box.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you get this whole pallet arrive.
Yeah, you need exactly on the transport to bring it to your home.
But what I'll do now is, so I'll say a big thank you to Jonathan for explaining a little bit more about the company and what they do, and explaining the calendar. And then we'll go into a free-for-all, off-the-record type thing. So thank you, Jonathan. The packaging, like I say earlier, it looks absolutely superb, and hopefully it'll just keep going from strength to strength.
Thanks, mate.